Okay. Hey guys, good morning. You doing okay? What time did y'all go to sleep? Oh gosh. Oh gosh. I heard some dude stayed up till 5 o'clock. Is that you? No? Okay, good. I'm 43 years old and I don't stay up past midnight anymore. But I was once a youth pastor, so I used to stay up past midnight a lot. And any youth pastors here in the room? Awesome. Any youth leaders in the room? Wow. Guys, you guys are heroes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do. It is so awesome. First thing to say is hello. My name is Mark Clark, unbelievably. Not sure what my parents were thinking. But I am originally from Canada. Grew up this first row. How many people have not been to Canada in this room? Right, that's what I thought. Most of you are like, Canada, that's a weird place up there. So grew up in Toronto, Ontario, and I think I already saw some people, and then spent 18 years in Vancouver, which is just above Seattle, on the West Coast, and just about a year and a half ago, moved down to your fine country and now live in Sacramento, California. Woo! Are you from Sacramento or just California? California. Okay, whereabouts? LA, love it. There is the population of Canada is the same population as California. And so it's a very interesting place. Moved down to America. I love America. It's great. We work at a church down there. I started a church up in Vancouver in 2010. I'll tell you a little bit about all the God stories and really cool things that happened tonight in my session. I'm speaking at the session. Some really cool things, and maybe you'll find yourself in that as well. But for this session, they wanted me to speak about cultural apologetics, ways to connect to your non-Christian friends, the culture around you. So that's what we're going to talk about. Hopefully it's not too heavy. I'll try to keep it light as best I can, but obviously some of the ideas are a little heavy, and I know we're probably all tired, so I'll try to do my best to keep it stuff that you can, but if you take notes, it's stuff that you can then go back to and go, okay, that's what this is. I've also written 2 books on this topic, and so if you like anything that I've talked about today, you can go look those up on Amazon. One's called The Problem of God, and the other one's called The Problem of Jesus. So what they wanted me to talk about was 4 or 5 big ideas in regard to cultural apologetics. And apologetics, of course, is it's a word that means defense. It doesn't mean that we apologize for our faith. It means we defend our faith. We defend our faith to a culture that might not already believe in Jesus, and you're trying to maybe hang out with your friends, or maybe it's you. Maybe you're here, you have a level of skepticism, and you probably do, we all do to some degree, but maybe you're talking to your friends and they don't believe yet, and you want to try to convince them that Christianity isn't just kind of an irrational thing that you believe in your heart and your emotions, and it's great, and then you go on with your life. It's actually very based on science, it's based on history, it's based on philosophy, it's based on psychology, it's based on literature, that it is, I believe, the best idea in the marketplace of ideas. Christianity, historically speaking, not just I want it to be true, but it's actually true. And I came to that conclusion by studying myself. How many of you grew up in non-Christian homes? Right, so a handful of people. So that was me growing up. I grew up in a home that was very atheistic, very antagonistic even toward Christianity, and I'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But I had no church background, no Christmas, no Easter, no nothing. First time I walked into a church, I was 19 years old, and it was this Baptist church, and I didn't really want to go there, and because in my mind, I'm like, it's just going to be, orange shag carpet and smell like mothballs, and everyone's going to be 200 years old, and that's not my idea of having a good time. And then I came to church, and there was girls there, and I got excited. All right, and I'm like, okay, I love church, I'm in. And so, and then God did some really cool things. So that was my background. So I really had to come to faith by studying it and thinking about it and kind of saying, does Christianity hold up when you start testing it, or is it just something that people believe? And so I started actually exploring. I started looking into other faiths. I started looking into Mormonism. Is Mormonism the most true thing? I started looking into other religions, and I came to realize that Jesus actually was a historical human being, and that he died and he actually from history rose again. And if that was true, I had to go backwards and go, who did he claim to be? What are these scriptures that tell his story? Does science hold up this philosophy? Because all my friends and family, they were just making fun of me all the time. They were like, you're part of a cult, right? And I'd be like sitting at dinner and they'd be like, you're part of a cult. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not part of a cult. Like, what did you do at church today? I'm like, well, I drank the blood and ate the body of a dead man. Okay, I see what you're saying. So I have to explain this and make sure that they come along because they were smart people. And I started realizing Christianity is actually for smart people. It's got a reputation today to be a faith that's like anti-science. It's not for smart people, it's just for people who, don't know enough. But then you begin to realize when you get into it that Christianity is the one that built all the universities, started all the hospitals, began philosophy departments. It was based on Christianity that Harvard got started, that Duke got started. All the major universities in the United States were actually born out of a Christian ethic that said we're going to study science and philosophy and psychology from a Christian perspective, try to put it together under one meta kind of narrative. That's where the word university comes from. It's a unification of a diversity of ideas coming under one major kind of meta narrative or story. And the story was, how do you frame this in regard to God and the world? So there's about 4 or 5 angles that they wanted me to talk about. And so the first one is faith and reason and science. And so when you begin to realize that Christianity holds up in regard to science, it actually begins to help your faith. Because especially when you guys get into college, what tends to happen statistically is people are Christians, they become Christians mostly before they're 18. Then they go to university or college and they get their faith challenged a little bit. They go to a first year philosophy class or a science class. They learn a little biology. They learn a little philosophy. They read, the different philosophers, and they go, okay, I'm not going to be a Christian anymore. I'm giving up my faith. And that's what I don't want you to do. I really don't want you to do that. And you don't have to, because Christianity, here's what you got to realize. It's the science departments. Leslie Newbegin, who's a philosopher, pointed this years. It's the science departments that have the most amount of theists. So when I say the word theist, you understand that's people who believe in God versus atheists who don't believe in God or agnostics who aren't sure. It's the science departments that actually have the most amount of theists, people who believe in God, because science, rather than pointing away from the existence of God, actually points toward the existence of God. So what happened over the last 100 years, it used to be that people would kind of look in and say, poke around at turtles or whatever on the outside, and then they'd come to some conclusions about nature. But over time, 30, 40 years ago, we discovered something called DNA. And when you look at DNA, you're not on the outside looking through a microscope. Now you're looking into the DNA strands of a human being. And you begin to realize that every human being is actually programmed with a certain eye color and hair color, and everything about you comes from what Francis Collins, who's a scientist, calls the language of God. This is the guy who mapped out the human genome in the 90s. And he began to realize that there's literally a language built into you that defines everything about your natural traits. And of course, mind doesn't come from matter. You needed mind before matter. Matter by itself can't create a code that begins to define who you are. And so scientists began to realize, man, there's actually a mathematical code. And if there's a mathematical code, in order to have that kind of mind, you need to have a mind that created it. Right? Nobody times nothing equals everything is not a philosophy that you're going to build your life on. And so when we began to realize, man, there's this language, scientists began to go, well, this kind of messes with the atheistic philosophy because you need someone to write the language. Now, there, of course, is another argument, which is very famous on Reddit. If you guys are on Reddit, or I don't know if Reddit's kind of your generation, it might be mine more, but where people say, well, you don't need God in order to get a DNA strand because there's aliens. All right, so that's the other philosophy you could take. We recognize there's a program built into the human genome. We recognize it looks like a mind actually created human beings, but don't worry, aliens did it, and that's why we're all here, just the experiment of aliens who created this DNA, which of course creates the philosophical problem of, well, then who created the aliens? Grr, and then we're back to square one. So the reality is the best philosophical reasoning for the scientific endeavor of DNA would be that God created DNA. He actually made it, and he created it. So the more we delve into science, and here's the thing, the first thing we got to understand. Every single person has a faith position, right? Every person you talk to has a faith position. So I come from a non-Christian family, and all my non-Christian friends, I mean, literally, I was like sitting around, in garages doing, dumb things with my friends one Friday, met Jesus, and 3 weeks later, I was back in that same garage telling them about Jesus and defending Christianity, and all of them thought I was crazy. And they're like, what are you even doing? And so they and my family think I have a faith position, but they don't. Right? And the first thing you got to do in conversations with people is try to convince them that they actually have a faith position, which they don't think, they're not going to admit they do. Here's an example. So my family, they're all against everything I believe. And so they're just agnostics or atheists who don't believe in anything. Of course, I'm a pastor, and so like, oh, you're a Christian and you have all these dumb beliefs. So my grandma passed away a little bit ago, and I went back to Toronto to do the funeral. And as I was doing the funeral, we were all kind of chatting about stuff, and everyone's kind of mourning her. And she had been in pain for a while, and one of my atheistic cousins said, well, at least Nanny's not in pain anymore. Faith position. Anytime someone says something like that, hold a mirror up and make them realize, because how did my cousin, that's called a metaphysical belief. That's a belief about the afterlife. That when people die, most people that you'll meet, if they're not people Christians, most people they'll say, when you die, you just go out of existence. But they don't have any proof of this. So the idea that my grandma wasn't suffering anymore is actually a philosophical belief about the afterlife. And I said to my cousin, how do you know that she's not suffering more? Have you been to the afterlife? Do you know anything about the afterlife? And you begin to realize our whole culture is actually built on faith positions. Everyone has something they believe for some reason that they couldn't even tell you. And so what you begin to present is, listen, I have a faith position about heaven and hell and the soul and God or whatever because of the scriptures. I have reason, I have history, I have things that I go back to, but you don't. You just come up with ideas and sitting around the table at what you think feels good, that, when people die, they go out of existence, but you have nothing to prove this. It's a pure faith position. And I don't want to build my life on a faith position that has no proof. I want to build my life on something that's a little bit more according to an argument, a mind, a logical, reasonable, rational. And so what you begin to realize is they start to look at you as someone who's built their life on reason and not faith, in the sense of like if faith is seen as kind of antagonistic toward reason. So everyone has a faith position. That's issue number one. And your conversation with them is to find out what their position is and then start to challenge it a little bit. The second is that science actually points toward the existence of God, not away from the existence of God. So you got DNA stuff. You have cosmology, right? I don't know how many of you are into into science and space and all, but basically, over the last, since the 1930s, we realized, so it used to be this philosophical argument was it's called the argument of contingency. Whatever begins to exist has to have a cause, right? Whatever begins to exist has to have a cause. If something began to exist, it had to come from somewhere, outside of itself. And so, for instance, you guys exist. Why do you exist? Who predated you? You can talk, it's cool. Your parents, right? And so your parents predated you, all right? And, one day they loved each other. Don't think about it too long. And now you exist, right? Now you exist. That's called contingency. Whatever begins to exist has to have a cause. So here's what everybody would say for 2,000 years. Well, we don't need God because the universe is eternal. It's infinite. It's been around forever. So you actually don't need somebody to ever cause it to come into existence. The uncaused, non-contingent element in the universe is the universe itself. There's no reason for God because the universe has already existed. And that was a pretty hard philosophical argument to debate until the 1930s, when Edwin Hubble looked through his telescope and he realized that the universe was expanding. And it had been doing so for a very, 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 very long time. And that if you retracted it backwards, you could find that all matter, time, energy came into existence in one single moment. And it exploded. And everything that came in one flash of light, all matter, time, energy. And the universe right now, here's the crazy thing. If you want to mind meld at 9:30 in the morning, The universe is expanding now, and what I mean by that is it's not like the planets are expanding. The planets are actually in place. It's the universe itself that's expanding. It's like all the planets and the solar systems and the galaxies are like buttons on a balloon, and the balloon is continuously expanding. It's like, well, what's on the other side of the balloon? That keeps me awake at night. How is the universe up? Here's what we begin to realize. You start putting the date back, you begin to realize that time, energy, matter all came into existence at a single moment. So if we know the universe had a beginning, the universe has to have a cause. Whatever begins to exist has to have a cause. The universe had a cause, ergo, you need God to actually begin it, which is beautiful because Jesus, of course, comes along and says in John 4 that God is spirit. Because we know when matter began to exist. And so God is spirit, he began the universe. And of course, Genesis 1 talks about this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth in a singularity, in an event that is singular. All time, matter, energy came into existence, bam, came into existence, and it actually points. So the universe actually points to the existence of God. And if you have people in your life who are atheists, this is a massive problem for them because they don't know how the universe began. They'll agree with you that it began in a single moment, but they don't know how it began. Of course, if something begins to exist, it has to have a cause. So these are all reasons that people say the existence of God is probably legitimate. The third one I'll talk about, and then I'll move on to the next topic, is the existence of morality, right? The existence of absolute moral, categories in your life is proof that God exists. Now, here's what I mean. If you have an absolute moral law, like if you would say, murder is wrong, right? You have to have an objective moral value giver to have ever said, murder is wrong. Now, the problem is in our culture, at least the culture I grew up in, morality became kind of a subjective relative thing. So it was like, well, you believe that, I believe this. And so, we don't even have the same standard of right and wrong. So I remember I worked at, you guys know what Michael's Arts and Crafts store is here? All right, I worked at Michael's Arts and Crafts store for like 6 years. I have no idea how. I still don't know anything about arts and crafts. I wore a red apron. People would ask me like, where are the googly eyes? I'd be like, aisle 6? I don't know, and then I'd just go out for a smoke and hide for like 30 minutes and wait till they left because I have no idea what Michael's still does. But I worked there for 6 years, and I remember I worked with a guy, and he would say, there's no God, and I don't believe in your moral standards or whatever. So I said, what do you mean you don't believe in my moral standards? He said, well, you might say something's right and wrong, but I believe something is right and wrong, and who are you to tell me that I'm right? Have you heard this before? Right? In our culture, yeah. People will say that. Who are you to tell me that what you think is right for me? And so I looked at him and I said, what if you and I knew he had a sister, got in a plane and we flew over to some random, jungle in the Amazon somewhere or something. And we walked into this tribe that had never been, reached. And instead of loving your neighbor, they like to eat them. And they took your sister and they captured her and they put her on a spit and they ate her for dinner. What would you say? Would you say that's right, wrong, or indifferent? And he said, oh, I see what you're trying to get at. And then he said, no, I would say that they only did something that I thought was wrong, but I'm not supposed to project my values on them. That's the cultural scenario we're in right now. But if you ever want to test this, just cut in line somewhere. Just go to a grocery store, and just cut someone off. They're in a big line, and just cut in and see what happens. Because very quickly, like I was at a county fair, which is, amazing. America, we never had these in Canada, right? A county fair. We were there, it was all the stuff, making pies and all this crazy. I was like, oh my gosh, I've seen this in the movies growing up. And they got like all the, the roller coasters that are gonna break and fall over anytime, and you see guys running it that you're like, I wouldn't trust that guy, with my car, let alone this zipper thing that's flipping around. Anyways. Or the Gravitron, it's like, whatever you call it, it's like wobbling, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my kids are gonna die. But of course they went on all these rides. And there was, half-hour lineups for all these rides. Now imagine, you go to the county fair, and you're lined up to go on the whatever, and you just cut just cut in line. What's gonna happen? People are just screaming, yeah, what are you doing cutting in line? And then you just say, hey bro, don't project your values on me, man. This is what I like to do. I like to cut people in line. Don't project all your opinions on right and wrong and whatever. And then if they really start, just chop them in the throat. Just chop them in the throat. And when they go, what are you doing? Chop me in the throat. I go, hey, bro, don't project your values on me, man. You believe not chopping people in the throat is right. I believe chopping people in the throat is right. Who are you to project your values on me? And sooner or later, you're going to begin to realize that everybody at some point has objective moral values that they want to agree on the difference between right and wrong. And when you get them there, then you have a conversation about, well, then who decided on what was right and wrong? Who decided rape is wrong? Because if we're just animals, there's actually no good argument for why rape is wrong. There's none. It could be helpful for your tribe to murder a bunch of people and kill them and make sure you steal their water because your tribe needs to survive. I mean, pure Darwinianism, that would never be wrong. Murdering a bunch of people, that's super helpful actually, because your job is to get your genes into the next gene pool and generation. So you gotta have these conversations when you begin to realize that if you believe in absolute moral standards, then you have to have a moral lawgiver. That Romans chapter 2 says God built a conscience into you. He stitched it into your mind. And of course, there's going to be different cultural realities. But there's a moral law. And if there's a moral law, there's a moral lawgiver. Okay, so that's some of the science around the existence of God. The other thing that they wanted me to talk about is evil and suffering. So evil and suffering, we'll spend a few minutes on that. Evil and suffering is probably, it's what's been called the rock of atheism. It's probably experientially the best argument against the existence of God, because everyone in this room has experienced suffering at some level, or if you haven't, just live a little longer, and you will. You will experience a tragedy, a diagnosis, a friend, a family member. You'll lose a parent or a grandparent. You'll see people suffer and be victims of things. You can turn on the news and you see the world is awful. And why it's been called the rock of atheism is because people then say, because the world is so awful, there's no way there's a good God, right, who would allow all of this evil and suffering to happen. And this is actually probably the most potent argument against Christianity, and very hard to discount, because of course it's very hard to, prove. One philosopher, St. Augustine, talked about the problem. So this is called the problem of evil. St. Augustine talked about the problem of good. And the problem of good is, but for most of us, life is pretty good. Like, how do we know that God isn't withholding 99% of the evil that could be happening in the universe? I mean, the fact that you are here today, the fact that you survived, God didn't kill you guys last night, right? Like, you should be jacked and pumped. You have another day to do something significant with your life. You have breath in your lungs. There's something called music. One writer that I read said on his epitaph, he's just going to write, I only needed one thing to prove the existence of God, Mozart. The fact of beauty, the fact of good food, of relationships, of art, of wonder, of music, these things are all the problem of good. That the existence of our life is actually better than it ever needed to be is actually important. But what about the problem of evil? What about the problem, the fact that, yes, people go through difficulty, people go through suffering? So the big pushback, or the big argument for the existence of God even in the midst of evil and suffering is this. Without God, you don't have a category called evil by which to put him on trial. So if you want to sit in a conversation with me and say, but, okay, what's an example? Any Chris Nolan fans in the crowd? Christopher Nolan, any movie people? All right, like The Dark Knight, you've probably seen this movie. You're looking at me like, I don't know what it is. Okay, Christopher Nolan. So, remember The Dark Knight Rises when it came out? It was 2012, and a guy went into the movie theater and he shot up a bunch of people and he killed them. So when that happened, my atheistic cousin went on Facebook. It's the only thing that existed at the time. You guys don't even know what that is. And he wrote, where was God when this guy came in the room and shot up a bunch of people? Well, he was in the same place he's always been, which is nowhere, because he doesn't exist and he doesn't care. That's why evil things happen. And so I responded on his Facebook page, like a good pastor should. Who told you that going and shooting up a bunch of people in a movie theater is wrong? Who decided this? Maybe it's actually really good for the advancement of him and his family. He needed this to happen, maybe for his own psychological identity. Who are you to objectively say when someone does something like that, it's evil? You have no category called evil, because in order to have a category called evil or even suffering, you need an absolute moral standard to compare it to and say, okay, now I know what evil is. Now I know what suffering is. Without that, all you have are animals making decisions for the betterment of themselves and no reason. When a lion kills a zebra, you ever watch these, you watch like nature shows and the lion, look around, and then the zebra's just like, oh, you're like, dude, this zebra's screwed. All right, and the zebra's like licking some water or whatever, and the lion just gets up behind that thing and just pounces down and bites its neck and rips its face off. I guarantee if you were sitting with your friends watching that show, you wouldn't say, my gosh, that lion just murdered that zebra. Because it's not murder. It's just nature. Nature is rough. Nature is, it's violent. And what animals do to each other, but none of us say, well, that's murder. That's just the way things are. So at what point in the human species, if all we are animals, at what point did we say, no, that's now murder. It's wrong. It's not wrong. There is no difference between a lion killing a zebra than someone just going out and doing whatever. This is the problem. So you need God in order to put God on trial for evil and suffering. And this is what C.S. Lewis, some of you know C.S. Lewis, he wrote, Chronicles of Narnia and some of the great Christian literature of the last 20th century. He talks about the idea that as an atheist, his argument against God was the world is too messed up for God to exist. But then he said, where did I get the category of too messed up? Because every time I tried to use it, it would disappear because I realized God's the one who gave me this category. And so the first thing to recognize is that the argument of God doesn't exist because of suffering doesn't work because there is no category called suffering without God. But that's not actually, that's a good philosophical argument. It doesn't actually help us when we're going through difficulty. And here's what I would say. Christianity is the best idea in the marketplace of ideas in regard to evil and suffering because it's better than, think of the other options. If you believe in karma, right? I exist on the West Coast. I exist, Vancouver for 18 years, California. People believe in karma, right? They're like, oh, you do good things and the universe pays it back to you, right? It's kind of this new age philosophy. You think good things and good things will happen to you. The law of attraction, The Secret, Rhonda Byrne, all this kind of new age stuff. If you want a boat in your life, you just put a picture of a boat up in your fridge. You go boat, 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 money, 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 money. And the universe has to bless you. It's called a law. It's built into the universe. So people believe all this stuff. So they believe in karma. You're going to get back what you put out in the universe. The problem with that is I went to India years ago. Any of you guys ever traveled to India? So when I got off the plane, there was the most abject poverty and suffering you've ever seen in your life right at the airport. You get out, there's babies there with no limbs. There's just women sitting there just all bloodied up and just lineups of them and they're just looking for money. They're scratching on your van. There's like, give me money. Absolute terrible suffering. Now in Christianity, here's what we would say. Jesus Christ came and suffered. And he came into our world, and he came alongside of us, and now we're supposed to be generous and actually help the world. So when we see pain and suffering, we're supposed to help it. What karma tells you, Hindu philosophies, Buddhist philosophies, they will tell you, well, we're reincarnating. So literally our guide said, don't help these people Because what they need to do is live this life as a cycle, but if you absorb their suffering, karma didn't pay them back what they needed, and they're gonna have to suffer again. So let them suffer. It's the only way that in the next life, they're not gonna have such a bad life anymore. Now, how many of you would choose that philosophy over the philosophy of the God who comes down and helps and suffers alongside of us? And so Christianity, as much as people want to go, hey, Christianity, there's no good answer to evil and suffering. It's a far better, I agree, it's a difficult one to answer because we don't know the reason God allows suffering. He doesn't come down every single time and say, here's why I'm allowing this in your life. Tonight, I'll kind of allude to the fact that you've probably noticed I'm up here, I kind of twitch my face around and my body does weird things or whatever. The reason is because I have Tourette syndrome, right? And I got that when I was 10 years old. The crazy thing about that, and I'll talk a little bit more about it tonight, but the crazy thing about that is God, you might go, why would this kid suffer? Because, by the way, like doing this with your face is not a way to be cool in high school, right? Like you're gonna be made fun of and whatever. So why would God allow my father to pass away when I was 15? Why would God allow my parents to get divorced when I was 8 or 9 and go through the things that I've been through? I could sit around and do that, but here's what I realized. That every time I get up and preach in front of, I started this church in Vancouver and I thought it's never gonna work. I'm not gonna connect any of these people because they're perfect lives and they're perfect little BMWs and they're perfect homes and I'm not gonna connect with any of these people. And then I began to realize that I was giving them permission to be broken. I was giving them permission to be imperfect people. And person after person after person would walk up from these perfect lives and say, just looking at you up there. How many times I've said, God, just take this away. I don't want to be twitching my stupid face around the whole time I'm looking at people. What is going on here? It's very distracting for the audience to have to look at this. And God's like, no. It's exactly what he said to the Apostle Paul. I'm not taking that thorn out of your flesh because in your weakness, I look big. My dysfunction serves a purpose that I can never understand, which is it actually helps people grow and give their lives to Jesus. It helps you. So would it be great to eliminate this from my life? Yes. But is there a purpose in it? Yes. It's what Malcolm Gladwell called the advantage of disadvantage. And he talks about this. Most of the great leaders that we read about, these business leaders, all these people, most of them are like either dyslexic or they had parents leave them, or you go through the list and we go, well, what purpose could my suffering possibly serve? It serves a lot of different purposes. And so the argument that it serves no good purpose, of course, is bankrupt in many ways. And then, of course, lastly, on the evil and suffering piece, as much as the Bible doesn't say, here's what happens in every single situation and why it happened, when we look at the cross of Jesus, this is what Tim Keller pointed out years ago. He said, when we look at the cross of Jesus, we realize that while God doesn't answer every time, here's why this happened, we know that the answer isn't because he doesn't care, because he actually came down and suffered for us alongside of us so that one day we would never feel the effects of evil and suffering anymore. That he came and absorbed all of that and suffered himself. Christianity is the only idea that God became a human being and actually suffered hunger, pain, loss of friendships, relationships, had parents. He probably lost Joseph. From what we can tell, Joseph, his dad, died pretty early in his life. Jesus went through pain. He was stripped naked and hung up in front of people. The movies don't show that. Put a thing over him. But the pain, the difficulty, the agony, psychologically and suffering, and physically, this is the God who actually did all this so that one day we wouldn't have to experience anymore. There's not a better idea in the marketplace of ideas than the Christian answer to evil and suffering. Have about 10 or 15 more minutes here. Let's do hell next. You guys good? You okay? You're like, wow, all right. Hell. Happy day. All right, I'll do hell really quick, and then I'll talk about Jesus for a couple minutes. So hell is one of the big reasons people don't want to become Christians, because they look at it as obviously something that's like, okay, this is, one of the arguments is it's overboard. why would, and you're talking to a guy who's, dad for all I know, he never became a Christian. So he died when I was 15, he was 47, didn't even call me and my brother and tell us he was sick. He just died. And then the hospital called us and said, your dad died. So, unless he met someone who led him to Christ at the hospital, which is always a hope, this is literally the experience of some of my family members. So the first pushback is like, well, it's overkill to punish someone for eternity for like a bad 47 years, right? It's just like, why would you do that? So the first point about this is to recognize that even in our justice system, you don't punish someone for as long as it took to commit a crime, right? It could take you 10 seconds to kill someone, and you're going to go to jail for 20 years. Because it's not about the time it took to do something, it's about the heaviness and weight of the crime. That's what the standard is. And of course, when it comes to human beings, again, if we're not just a product of naturalistic evolutionary ideas, then when you kill a human, it's vastly different than killing an animal of some kind. Like, if we drove over a ladybug or whatever, no one would even care. But if you walked out and I was leaving here and I drove over a dog, she's like, yeah, what a gross illustration. It's true. So if I drove over a dog and then just kind of looked out the window and went, and kept driving, how would you feel about it? Like, what a loser, what a monster. So keep going up and keep ratcheting it up, the essence of the kind of things we're talking about. So you've offended a ladybug, who cares? You've offended a cat, maybe killed a cat. Maybe you'd be fine with that. But once you get in the dog category, now it starts to become like a moral creature. It's like, oh, dogs. Like, no one's ever asked me if cats go to heaven. No one. And I have a cat, I hate cats, but my daughter has a cat, leaves it in her room, because Taylor Swift has a cat, so she doesn't have a cat. She hasn't got a cat. We're going to the Taylor Swift concert on Saturday, by the way, out in Sacramento. My kids got tickets, got early in and got all the tickets on the computer at 1 o'clock in the morning. Boom, boom, boom. Got 5 tickets. Now, I might sell mine, because I think they bought them for cheap, and now they're really expensive, so I might just sell them. They're going to have a stranger sitting beside them. Anyways, so they got a cat. No one's ever said, do you think my cat's going to be in heaven? Do cats go to heaven? But the minute you jump from cat to dog, now we're starting to get into okay, are all dogs go to heaven, right, guys? There's even a movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven. Because dogs, it's like cats are just I'm going to kill you in your sleep tonight, whatever. Or dogs, I want to serve you, I love you, and unconditional love. So now once you move into dog category, now it's like murder almost if you kill a dog. And now just keep going up to human beings. But now don't stop at human beings. Now go God. Now you've offended God. Now you chose to deny the existence of God and not respond to the grace of God. That is an infinite sin that lasts forever. And C.S. Lewis actually talks about the idea that I'm not sure that when people get to hell, that they're always repentant anyway. That maybe the thing that got them there, even if they were given an opportunity, they wouldn't do it anyway because they had to bow a knee to Christ. And they had to go, you know what, I don't want there to be a God. I want to be an autonomous human being who's my own God. And so C.S. Lewis says, maybe the doors of hell are locked from the inside. So you have the concept of an infinite justice. Now, secondly, just the concept of justice. I remember talking to my own mom one day, and she was like, I don't like this concept of hell that you believe. You're up there, you preach the Bible, and you allude to this concept that people go, and I'm like, well, the number one reason I do it is because the Bible says it, and Jesus taught it. So I don't get to make up whatever I want, right? If I was creating a religion, probably not. Jesus taught it, gotta believe it. So she's like, yeah, but it's wrong for God to do this. And I'm like, okay, let me ask you a question. If you found out someone raped someone or killed someone, would you want them put in jail? Well, yes, of course. Okay, so there's a divine sense of justice built in you. Yes, and if they didn't go to jail, here's the thing. Always remember this. The only culture that struggles with the concept of hell is ours. Because we get to sit at a Starbucks with our latte and think about philosophy and say, I don't like the concept of hell, blah, blah. You go into tribes and jungles all over the world where there's not a sense of justice or police to keep you safe. And you go talk to the father whose random tribe came in and took all the girls off into some thing and killed the family members of the tribe and then took all the girls off. And that father won't lose an hour of sleep over the concept that that guy is going to get justice from God one day. So Miroslav Volf, who's this philosopher, he says, it takes the quiet of a suburban life to ever challenge the idea that God would bring justice. It takes the quiet of our little comfortable life. I don't like God's philosophy on this or this. It takes all of that comfort. But if you lived in the real world, you wouldn't lose an hour of sleep over the concept that God is one day going to carry out justice. Now, who's he going to carry out justice? You, of course, would be fine if he carried out justice on Hitler. But then you start going down the line, and all of a sudden it gets to like random Joe who you just know, and he's not a Christian. And here's the beautiful part of the Bible, which I don't think a lot of people, sometimes when I speak at audiences, they don't necessarily know this piece. It's really important. The justice of God in heaven and hell will be meted out exactly according to each individual person for what they did and didn't do. And the reason we know this is because almost every passage in the Bible that talks about judgment talks about what you did with your life. So you can write these down. Romans chapter 2, Matthew chapter 25, Revelation 21, John chapter 5. Romans 2, Matthew 25, Revelation 20 and 21, and John chapter 5. Every time people are standing in front of Jesus on Judgment Day, in front of God, he says, what did you do? And he opens up a book, and it's according to what they did. Meaning, and there's even parables of Jesus where he says, you know, your experience of heaven is going to be different than their experience of heaven because of what you did. So I gave you $5 and you turned it into 10, so I'm going to give you 10 cities. And I gave you $5 and you buried it out of fear, so I'm not even going to give you any more cities. This is like parables about the existence of your eternal state and how everyone's is going to be different. It's not just going to be one big Apple store of experience and it's just kind of heaven. It's all kinds of different experiences, which means we worship a God who does justice exactly according to people's lives, i.e., there could be less or more suffering depending on what people did, which means the whole argument of Hitler and this normal person, God is absolutely perfect in carrying out the justice. Now, the other thing that people argue about, well, what about the flames, you know, flames and fire? That seems nasty and mean. Here's what I would say about that. So every time in the Bible that flames and fire are used, it's most of the time a metaphor for the judgment of God. It's an image about the judgment of God. So I don't know whether it's going to be actual literal flames, like licking at people's bodies in this place, or whether it's a metaphor and a picture about God's judgment. But even if it's a metaphor or a picture, it doesn't mean it's going to be any better, because it could symbolize psychological torment. It could, you know, when I grew up, you guys have those like big green electrical boxes in your suburbs where it's like the hydro or whatever's going on. And there's like, where I grew up, there was one right beside my house. And there was a guy on it, and there was a sticker, and there was like a lightning bolt going through the guy, and he's like, bah! Like that guy. So that picture is brutal. It's like, oh my goodness. But the experience of it would be worse. That tends to be what metaphors in the Bible do. It's like people go, oh, okay, so the flames might not be literal. Phew. It's like, no. But the flames might be pointing to something worse. Which is why we need to go, look, our job in this world is to reach as many people as possible to not experience that. You can't get around it. You can't think your way out of the concept of hell. It's real. Jesus taught it. It's happening. It's going to be done perfectly. It's going to be done according to the person's life. But our job is to save as many people as possible from it. Okay, lastly, and if there's stuff you guys wonder about, literally I have chapters on every single thing that I'm talking about right now on the problem of God. So one of the longest ones on hell, evil and suffering, all this stuff. Lastly, talk about Jesus. He was a historical person. There's a lot of myth and philosophy right now that Jesus didn't really exist, which is about the dumbest thing any academic would say. There's all kinds of proof. There's at least 12 or 13 people outside of the Bible that talked about Jesus in the first century and his existence and his miracles and his teaching and the fact that his people that follow him claim that he rose from the dead. There's all kinds of legitimate reasons to believe in the legitimacy of the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, tell the story about Jesus. And there's all kinds of historical reasons to believe in the resurrection of Jesus because a couple reasons. The first one is his followers died, like were tortured, not just like 3 of them, like hundreds of them died for the belief that they saw the resurrected Jesus. Now here's the one thing people say, oh, they were just creating a religion. Here's the one thing you're never going to do. You're never going to die and get tortured for something that you made up. Right? If we got together today and said, let's create a religion, let's pretend, blah, blah, blah. The minute someone starts pulling your fingernails off, you're like, okay, it didn't happen, or wants to kill your family or whatever. These people really saw Jesus rise from the dead to the point that they suffered for it. The other thing is people say, well, no, the resurrection couldn't have happened because, maybe what happened is there's something called the swoon theory where Jesus was taken off the cross and they threw him in a ditch. And then, he just, they thought he was dead. And here's the one thing the Roman Empire never did. They used to kill 6,000 people in a single day. The one thing they didn't do is just take a guy off a cross and throw him in a ditch. And then he just kind of gets up and goes, "Ooh, that was close." And just starts walking around, hey, I got resurrected, believe in me. Didn't happen ever in the history of the Roman Empire. They knew how to kill people. Jesus Christ got crucified, got beaten, almost dead before he gets crucified, gets a spear thrown through his right through his ribs and his heart sac. He bleeds it out, he dies. And 3 days later, he rises again. And if that happened, then everything about your life has to change. If that really happened. And I'll end with this. I could go through, 10 arguments for why the resurrection of Jesus really happened. But here's the most important thing about it. I remember a couple years ago, I got asked to speak at this apologetics conference, and I got up and I did this 45-minute presentation on the resurrection of Jesus. And at the end of it, everyone was like jacked, and they're like, "Yes, man, all these historical," and they're on their feet, man. They're like, "Yes," and I'm like, "Do you believe it?" And they're like, "Yes." "Do you believe it?" "Yes." And then I said, "So does Satan, and it doesn't save him." And here's why. Because there's a difference in believing it and treasuring it above everything else in the universe. I'm talking about, I don't want to know whether you just give intellectual assent to the idea that Jesus rose from the dead. Do you treasure it above everything else in existence, so much so that it affects what you do with your body, what you do with your free time, what you do with your money, what you do with your families, what you do with your work, what you do with the rest of your existence? Do you treasure it above everything? Because James tells us the demons know and they shudder, but they're not saved. That's why every time I get to baptize people, I say, "Do you believe in Jesus as Lord?" Great. "Savior?" Great. "Do you believe him as treasure?" Like, do you actually want to get to the last day? Not the first day. Anybody can start a relationship. I'm talking about, are you going to treasure Jesus Christ on the last day? So let me pray for us to that end. Father, I pray for whatever we're going through, whatever questions these guys have. They've just been so respectful and kind of just listening in, taking notes, trying to figure this stuff out as we all are. And thank you for your grace and giving us minds to do so. And these pointers to you, even though you don't kind of show up in person in our experience, you give us all these pointers to your existence, and it makes kind of the odds that you really do exist better than that you don't. So I pray that some of this stuff would be helpful, both in our own skepticism and doubts, but also with the people that we share with, and that people would come to know Jesus because of some of this, and that our faith would be strengthened, and we'd treasure you more because of just getting hit with the reality of this. So speak to us. Thanks for each one of these guys. Help them to have a ton of fun as they just go deeper with you and with one another. Thanks for this time in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Guys, Thank you for being here. You're very respectful. Love it. Hope you have a great afternoon. And we'll see you tonight. Thanks for being here, guys.